The strange encounter. It was a chilly night, and John Miller sat alone in his old rusted car. The engine coughed, barely alive, as he stared out at the glowing neon sign of a diner. Galaxy Bites, it read, flickering every few seconds. He wasn't sure why he had stopped there. Maybe it was the growling hunger in his stomach or the sheer hopelessness of the day. Either way, he pushed open the creaking car door and walked inside. The diner was oddly quiet. A single waitress stood behind the counter, polishing cups that didn't seem to need cleaning. The place smelled of coffee and something faintly metallic. John picked a booth in the corner, slumping into the seat. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and his wallet had exactly $3.72. Enough for a small coffee, maybe. As he stared at the menu, the door swung open with a soft chime. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing at the figure that entered. She was tall, too tall to be from around here, with shimmering silver hair that fell like liquid metal down her back. Her skin glowed faintly, almost like moonlight, and her eyes, they were the most unsettling part. Silver, with no pupils, yet they seemed to see everything. John quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the menu. He wasn't in the mood to deal with weirdos tonight. The sound of her footsteps drew closer. He tensed as she walked past empty tables and sat across from him. Without asking, without hesitation. "Hello, human," she said, her voice smooth and musical, but carrying an edge of authority. John blinked, caught off guard. Do I know you?" "No," she replied simply, folding her long, elegant hands on the table. "But I know you." John frowned, glancing around the diner. The waitress was gone, just like that. The place felt emptier than it had a moment ago. "Look, lady, I don't know what you're selling, but I'm not interested." "I'm not selling anything," she said, tilting her head slightly. Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm offering." John let out a humorless laugh. "Offering? What could you possibly offer me? Do I look like someone who has money to throw around?" She leaned closer, her silver eyes locking onto his. "No, you look like a man with nothing left to lose. And that makes you perfect." His laugh faltered. "Perfect for what?" "To be my husband," she said, her voice calm as though she were discussing the weather. John stared at her, his mind scrambling for an explanation. Was this some kind of prank? Was she crazy? Or was he dreaming? He pinched his arm. Nope, definitely awake. "Okay, lady," he said, raising his hands. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not playing. Find someone else to be your husband, or whatever." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You misunderstand. This is not a game. It's a business arrangement." "A business arrangement," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. And what's in it for me?" "Alien children and intergalactic alimony." Her smile widened. "Money. Enough to pay off your debts. Enough to buy that small house you dream about. Enough to start over." John froze. His heart pounded in his chest. How did she know about his debts? Or the tiny house he'd looked at online 100 times but could never afford? He leaned back, trying to look unfazed. "And what's in it for you?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window for the first time. "Protection. Protection." John raised an eyebrow. "From what?" Her expression darkened. "That's complicated." He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. "This is insane. You're insane. I don't even know your name." "Soraya," she said. "And you are John Miller. 32 years old. Former mechanic. Currently unemployed. Drowning in debt." Her silver eyes softened. "Am I wrong?" John felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. How did she know all of that? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Who are you? And what do you really want?" Soraya reached into the pocket of her sleek, black coat and pulled out a small device. It looked like a glowing blue chip, no bigger than a coin. She placed it on the table, sliding it toward him. "This is a universal credit chip. It has enough to pay off every debt you have, and more. John stared at it, tempted but wary. And all I have to do is pretend to be your husband. For now, she said. But there's more to it. You'll be stepping into a dangerous world. You'll have to trust me. Do you think you can do that? John leaned back, crossing his arms. You're asking a lot for someone I just met. I know, she said, her voice softer now. But I don't have much time. And neither do you. Before he could respond, the door to the diner swung open with a loud bang. John turned, his stomach sinking. 3 figures in dark cloaks stood in the doorway, their faces obscured by masks. They didn't move, but the air in the diner grew heavy. Soraya's voice was a whisper now. Decide quickly, John. Do you want to live or die? His heart raced as he looked between her and the cloaked figures. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. His life was never going to be the same again. The proposal no one refuses. John couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he stepped out of that diner, his life had crossed into something unreal. He sat across from Soraya, her silver eyes calm yet unblinking, as if she had all the time in the universe. But John could feel the weight of something pressing down, like they were being watched even now. The credit chip she had placed on the table still glowed faintly, pulsing every few seconds. He hadn't touched it. Not yet. John leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let's say I believe you. Let's say I take this. Deal. He gestured to the chip with a slight nod. What exactly am I getting myself into? Soraya's gaze held his, unwavering. You'll be entering into a temporary partnership. By the laws of my people, I need to be bonded before the next lunar cycle. If not, I forfeit my position and everything I own. In exchange for posing as my husband, you will receive protection, wealth, and resources beyond anything Earth can offer. John narrowed his eyes. Why me? You're expendable, she said bluntly, as if the word carried no weight. You have no ties, no family. No one will miss you if things go wrong. Wow, John chuckled dryly, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Way to make a guy feel special. Her lips twitched, almost like she was trying to smile but wasn't sure how. It's not personal. It's practical. John stared at the chip again, weighing his options. The cloaked figures from earlier hadn't followed him outside the diner, but their presence lingered in the back of his mind, like shadows waiting for him to make a wrong move. And these people, the ones in the cloaks, who are they? Soraya's expression darkened, her eyes flicking toward the window as if expecting to see them standing there. They are hunters. Assassins hired to ensure I do not succeed. Great, John muttered. So, by agreeing to this, I'm painting a target on my back. Yes, she replied without hesitation. He blinked, stunned by her honesty. You're really not good at selling this, you know. I find deception wastes time, she said simply. But there's something you should know. The hunters are after me now. With or without you, I remain their target. However, with you by my side, they cannot attack directly. The laws prohibit interference with bonded pairs. For them, harming you would mean war. John leaned back in his seat, absorbing her words. It sounded insane. Yet the fear in her eyes was real, even if she hid it well. And what happens if I say no? He asked, watching her carefully. Soraya was silent for a moment. Then she pushed the credit chip closer to him. Take it anyway. Pay off your debts. Live comfortably. He frowned. What's the catch? Her silver gaze locked onto his. You'll live comfortably, for a short time, until they find you. John's heart skipped a beat. So, no matter what I do, they'll come after me. Soraya nodded slowly. The moment you sat across from me, you were part of this. The hunters know your face now. It cannot be undone. John exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. You're telling me I walked into this diner for a cup of coffee and left with alien assassins on my tail? Just my luck. Soraya watched him closely, and for the first time, her voice softened. I'm sorry. I didn't intend for this to happen. But I can offer you a way forward, one that benefits us both." John looked at the chip again. The weight of the decision pressed down hard. He wasn't exactly swimming in options. Rent was overdue, his landlord was already threatening eviction, and his car might not survive another month. Maybe this was fate, or just plain stupidity. Either way, it was better than sitting around waiting for life to crush him completely. "Fine," he said, letting out a heavy sigh. "I'll do it." Soraya's eyes glimmered with something that almost looked like relief. "You've made a wise choice." John tapped the credit chip with his finger. "But I have conditions. First, I'm not wearing any weird alien clothes. Second, no one touches my car. And third, you better not expect me to kiss you for this to work." A brief flicker of amusement crossed Soraya's face. "Noted." As they stood up, John glanced back at the empty diner. The world outside felt different now, like he had stepped into the first chapter of a sci-fi novel he hadn't signed up to read. Little did he know, this was just the beginning, the hidden threat. The apartment Soraya had rented was nothing like John expected. For someone claiming to be royalty, or at least alien nobility, he imagined something sleek and futuristic, maybe floating or powered by strange tech. Instead, it was a modest one-bedroom in a rundown building on the city's edge. The kind of place where neighbors avoided eye contact, and the elevators creaked like they were holding on for dear life. John tossed his jacket over the worn-out couch and glanced around. Not exactly a palace. "It's temporary," Soraya replied, stepping inside after him. She moved gracefully, but there was tension in her shoulders, like she was constantly listening for something no one else could hear. "You sure those guys in cloaks won't find us here?" he asked, locking the door behind them. Soraya barely glanced at him. "I'm sure they already know where we are, but they won't attack directly. Not yet." John dropped onto the couch, rubbing his face. "Great. Love the feeling of being hunted by alien assassins. Real comforting." She approached the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The street below was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Nothing unusual. No cloaked figures lurking. At least, not that John could see. "You'll get used to it," Soraya said quietly, still watching the street. Not exactly reassuring. After a long silence, she finally let the curtain fall and turned to face him. "I need to explain something, John. The hunters aren't just after me because of who I am. They're after you now because you're more valuable than you realize." John raised an eyebrow. "Me? I'm just a broke mechanic. What's so valuable about that?" Soraya stepped closer, lowering herself into the armchair across from him. "Humans are rare in the galactic empire, not just because of your species isolation, but because of your genetic code." John blinked. "My what?" She tapped her temple lightly, as if trying to find the right words. "Your DNA carries a unique pattern that can unlock certain technologies, ancient artifacts from civilizations long gone. No other species has that ability. It's why humans have been left alone for so long. But the moment one of you leaves Earth, everything changes." John leaned back, exhaling sharply. "So let me get this straight. You married me, not because you needed a husband, but because I'm some kind of alien key." "Yes," she admitted, not even trying to sugarcoat it. "Wow," John laughed bitterly. "I feel so used." Soraya didn't flinch. "Would you rather I had lied?" "Maybe a little," he muttered. The air between them grew heavy. John could feel the weight of the truth pressing down. He wasn't just in danger because of Soraya. He was valuable on his own. And that made things worse. Before he could dwell on it, a soft chime echoed from Soraya's wrist. She glanced at the small holo display that flickered to life, and her expression tightened. "What is it?" John asked, sitting up. "They're closer than I thought," she replied, standing abruptly. "We need to leave." "Leave? We just got here." John jumped to his feet. "Can't we at least pack or something?" "There's no time," Soraya said, already moving toward the door. John grabbed his jacket, shoving his feet into his boots. "You could have at least warned me before dragging me into this space soap opera." Soraya paused by the doorway, glancing back at him. "I did warn you." He scowled. "You said I'd be safe if I stayed with you." "You are," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But safe doesn't mean comfortable." John was about to respond when the lights flickered. For a brief second, the room plunged into darkness. And in that moment, John saw them. Outside, across the street, 3 figures stood beneath the broken street lamp. The same cloaks, the same masks. His stomach twisted. "Oh, Soraya. I see them." The lights flickered back on, but when John looked again, the street was empty. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Soraya locked the door behind them as they hurried down the hallway. Hunters can shift between dimensions for short periods. It allows them to stalk without being seen. "Great," John grumbled. "So now we're dealing with invisible alien ninjas." Soraya didn't answer. She led him to the stairwell, where they descended quickly. Each step echoed, the sound amplifying the uneasy silence around them. When they reached the lobby, John caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He froze. One of the masked figures stood by the entrance, partially hidden in the shadows. "Soraya." "I know," she whispered, gripping his wrist tightly. The figure didn't move. It simply watched, head tilted slightly as if observing prey. "What now?" John asked, his voice barely audible. Soraya didn't blink. "We walk. Don't run. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't look back." John swallowed the lump in his throat as they stepped toward the door. He could feel the figure's gaze burning into him, but he kept moving. The cool night air hit his face as they stepped outside. His heart raced, but he didn't look back. By the time they reached the car, Soraya finally exhaled, her grip loosening slightly. "Are they gone?" John dared to ask. "For now," she replied, but the tension in her shoulders remained. John climbed into the driver's seat, starting the engine. "So, where to now?" Soraya glanced at the horizon, where faint stars twinkled through the city smog. "Farther than they can follow." As they drove off, John couldn't help but wonder if there was anywhere far enough for that. The real reason. The stars outside the windshield looked sharper than John had ever seen. Then again, it wasn't every day he found himself flying through low orbit in what appeared to be a sleek black spacecraft, hidden beneath an abandoned scrapyard. "Still think we could have driven," John muttered, glancing nervously at the holographic controls hovering around Soraya's fingertips. The interface rippled like liquid glass as she piloted the ship with a calm focus. "If we drove, we'd already be dead," Soraya replied without looking up. John exhaled and leaned back in his seat, watching as the earth shrank behind them. The hunters hadn't followed. At least, not yet. "So let's get this straight," John began, rubbing his temple. "I'm apparently some rare galactic artifact unlocker, and you need a husband for political reasons. You keep saying this is temporary, but I'm getting the feeling you're not telling me everything." Soraya's silver eyes flicked toward him, just for a second. "I told you the truth." "Yeah." John arched an eyebrow. "Well, you left out the part where I might get vaporized by interdimensional assassins." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tapped a series of glyphs on the console, and the stars around them shifted as the ship adjusted its course. "I thought I could handle them," Soraya said quietly. "I thought they wouldn't risk open conflict." John studied her for a moment. For someone who acted as if she had everything under control, she looked tired. "But they're willing to risk it now," he guessed. Soraya nodded slowly. John let out a low whistle. "Okay. So what's the real reason you needed me?" "And I mean the real reason. No more vague alien riddles." Soraya hesitated, as if calculating whether or not to answer. Finally, she spoke. "I am not just royalty," she said, her voice steady but soft. I am heir to one of the oldest bloodlines in the galactic empire. My family holds influence over entire star systems, but our power is tied to tradition. The bond of marriage, or pairing, as we call it, solidifies our right to rule. John frowned. You're saying you needed a fake husband to stay in power. Not just any husband. Soraya's eyes darkened slightly. It had to be a human. John sat forward. Why human? She hesitated again. Because humans represent balance. In ancient times, your kind was considered a stabilizing force in galactic politics. A human partner can override succession disputes. If I bond with you, no one can challenge my right to rule. Without you, I am vulnerable. John ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. So I'm not just some random guy you picked at a diner. You needed me. Specifically me. Yes, she admitted, but I didn't expect the hunters to intervene so quickly. John leaned back with a groan. Great, so I'm part of some ancient political chess game. In a sense, Soraya replied. Awesome. Love that for me. Soraya turned to him fully now, her gaze softening. I understand if you feel used, John. But I promise, once this is over, you'll be free. With more wealth than you could ever spend. John narrowed his eyes at her. You keep saying that, but you and I both know nothing is ever that simple. Soraya's expression shifted, and for the first time since they met, she looked uncertain. There's something else, isn't there? John pressed. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped suddenly, glancing sharply at the console. The holographic display flickered, symbols flashing in rapid succession. What now? John asked, sensing the tension in her posture. We're being followed, Soraya said grimly. John's stomach dropped. By the hunters. No, she replied, a thin layer of ice in her voice. By someone worse. Before John could ask, the ship jolted violently. Alarms blared, and the stars outside spun wildly. Hold on, Soraya shouted, gripping the controls. The ship dived sharply, weaving between bursts of blue energy that exploded behind them. John clung to his seat, heart pounding. I thought you said this ship was stealthy. It was, Soraya snapped. Until someone decided to start broadcasting their human lives, signs across the entire sector. John's eyes widened. Wait, I did that. How? I didn't touch anything. You didn't have to, she growled. Your DNA lights up alien sensors like a flare. Another blast struck the hull, sending sparks flying across the cockpit. Okay, I get it. I'm a walking alien beacon, John shouted. Now what do we do? Soraya's fingers danced over the controls. We outrun them. John glanced at the rear display. A massive, angular warship loomed behind them, sleek and predatory. Ah, that thing looks like it eats ships like ours for breakfast, John pointed out. Soraya's eyes narrowed. Not if we move fast enough. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring as they skimmed the upper atmosphere of a nearby moon. John's breath caught in his throat as they dipped lower and lower. Tell me you're not flying straight into that, he yelled. Soraya smirked slightly. Relax. I know what I'm doing. As they entered the dense cloud cover, the pursuing warship hesitated, holding its position above the moon. See, Soraya said calmly. They won't follow us in here. John exhaled in relief, slumping in his seat. I swear, I'm going to need therapy after this. Soraya chuckled lightly. Perhaps, but for now, you're still alive. John glanced at her, watching the faint glow of her silver eyes as she navigated the ship through the thick fog. Alive, sure, but for how much longer? Escape plan. The fog on the moon's surface was thicker than John expected. It clung to the ship like a living thing, swirling around the hull as if it were trying to pull them deeper into the landscape. From the cockpit, the view outside was almost non-existent. Are you sure this is safe? John asked, peering nervously at the faint outlines of jagged rocks that barely emerged from the mist. Soraya's hands moved steadily over the controls, adjusting their course by millimeters. Safe isn't the word I'd use, but it's necessary. John glanced at the rear display again. The massive warship that had been following them still hovered above the atmosphere, motionless. It hadn't risked pursuit through the thick clouds. "Why aren't they following us?" John asked, leaning closer. "They had no problem firing at us a few minutes ago." "They can't see us," Soraya replied. "And without visual confirmation, they won't risk sending in drones. The magnetic field here interferes with their sensors. It's one of the few places they can't track us directly." John let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "So we just waited out?" Soraya shook her head. "No, we find the transport hidden here and leave this moon entirely." John blinked. "Wait, there's another ship here." "Yes," she replied simply. "And you didn't think to mention that earlier." She shot him a brief glance. "I didn't think we'd need it this soon." John slumped in his seat. "I feel like I'm playing catch-up every 5 minutes with you." Soraya didn't respond. Her attention remained fixed on the scanners as she guided the ship lower. The rocky terrain below began to break through the mist, revealing jagged ridges and dark valleys stretching as far as the eye could see. John watched in silence as they descended, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. "Okay, so let me get this straight," he said finally. "We land, find this hidden ship, and leave before the hunters or that warship realize we're gone. Correct?" John nodded slowly. "Sounds easy enough." "It won't be," Soraya added, her tone almost amused. "Of course not," John muttered. "Why would it be?" The ship touched down gently on a flat, barren stretch of land between two towering cliffs. Soraya powered down the engines, and silence filled the cockpit. "All right," she said, standing up. "Let's move quickly. The ship we need is buried beneath the surface." John froze. "Buried? You mean we have to dig it out?" "Not exactly," she replied, striding toward the hatch. John hurried after her, stepping onto the moon's surface. The fog was even thicker outside, wrapping around them like a dense blanket. The rocky ground beneath their feet felt solid but uneven. "This way," Soraya said, leading him toward one of the cliffs. As they walked, John couldn't help but glance over his shoulder repeatedly. The warship hadn't moved, but he felt exposed. "So," John began, trying to distract himself, "how exactly did you hide a ship under the ground?" "It's been here for centuries," Soraya replied, scanning the area with a small handheld device. "Built by one of my ancestors, it was designed to be invisible to most sensors. Only someone with the right genetic markers can activate it." John raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. That's me." "Correct." John laughed lightly. "Of course it is. Lucky me." After a few minutes of silent walking, Soraya stopped abruptly. "We're here," she said. John glanced around, frowning. "I don't see anything." Soraya knelt, brushing aside a layer of dust and stone. Beneath it, faint markings etched into the rock began to glow softly. "Place your hand here," she instructed, pointing to a specific symbol. John hesitated. "What happens if I touch it, and it doesn't work?" "Then we die," Soraya replied flatly. John blinked. Great pep talk. Taking a deep breath, he placed his palm against the glowing symbol. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled. A deep mechanical hum echoed from beneath the surface as the rock slowly began to slide aside, revealing a narrow descending passage. John stepped back, wide-eyed. "That's actually pretty cool." Soraya gave a small nod. "Come on. The ship is below." They descended into the passage, the walls around them illuminated by faint blue light. The deeper they went, the more John felt like they were entering something ancient and forgotten. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a vast underground hangar. And there, in the center, sat a sleek, black ship far larger than the one they had arrived in. John let out a low whistle. "Now that looks like a royal ship." Soraya stepped forward, brushing her hand along the smooth metal hull. This will get us out of this system unnoticed. As she worked to activate the ship, John wandered around the hangar, marveling at the technology. John called out after a moment. Why didn't your ancestors just use this thing if it's so advanced? Soraya's voice echoed softly. Because not everyone could access it. Only a bonded pair could. John turned toward her slowly. A bonded pair. Soraya met his gaze, her silver eyes unreadable. Yes, a pilot and their bonded partner. One to control the ship's systems, and one to unlock its full potential. John crossed his arms. So, you're saying this ship won't even work without me? Correct, she said with a faint smile. John sighed deeply. I really should have just stayed in that diner. The power John holds. The hum of the ancient ship resonated through the underground hangar, vibrating faintly beneath John's feet. He paced nervously near the entrance ramp as Soraya continued working at the control panel near the cockpit. Soft blue lights traced along the ship's hull, illuminating the once dormant vessel. Okay, John said, breaking the silence. So let me get this straight. This ship, this massive alien tech wonder, won't fly unless I am on board. Soraya didn't look up from the console. Correct. Because of my unique human DNA and all that. Yes. John ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. You're really leaning into this chosen one thing, huh? Soraya finally turned to face him, arms crossed. It's not about being chosen, John. Your genetic pattern is rare, but not unique. Other humans could technically activate the ship, but you are the one here. And right now, that makes you irreplaceable. John frowned, leaning against the ship's hull. So what exactly does this ship do that the other one doesn't? Soraya's gaze flickered toward the far end of the hangar. This is not just a transport vessel. It's a command-class starship, capable of bending space to shorten travel distances. It's equipped with cloaking technology that not even the hunters can detect. But most importantly, it houses something far older than both of us. John's eyebrows shot up. Older than us? What, like alien treasure? Soraya gave him a small, knowing smile. In a way, it carries an artifact from a long-forgotten race, something powerful enough to alter the outcome of wars. John stood straighter. And let me guess, that's why everyone's after you. Yes, she said softly. The weight of her words hung in the air. John exhaled, stepping closer. Okay, but what does any of this have to do with me specifically? Soraya hesitated for a moment, as if debating how much to reveal. Then she walked over to the side of the ship and placed her palm against a glowing panel. A soft hiss filled the air, and a hidden compartment opened. Inside, resting on a pedestal, was a strange crystalline orb, no larger than a grapefruit. It pulsed with faint, golden light, and the longer John stared at it, the more it seemed to draw him in. What is that? John asked, unable to tear his eyes away. Soraya's voice dropped to a near whisper. That is a celestar core. John looked at her. That's supposed to mean something to me. Soraya stepped aside, allowing him a closer look. The celestar cores were created by an ancient race that predates all known civilizations. They contain energy unlike anything in the galaxy, enough to power entire star systems. But they are locked. No alien species has been able to unlock them in thousands of years. John tilted his head. And you think I can unlock it? I don't think. Soraya replied. I know. John chuckled nervously. Okay, this is getting a little ridiculous. You're telling me that not only am I some kind of political pawn in alien royalty drama, but now I'm also the key to unlocking ancient artifacts. Soraya's gaze softened. I understand how strange this must feel. But I promise you, John, your presence here is no accident. The hunters know what you are capable of, even if you don't yet. John took a cautious step toward the core, feeling the strange warmth it radiated. So what happens if I touch it? Soraya's expression grew serious. You may awaken something powerful, or nothing at all. But if it works, we'll have access to enough power to escape the hunters indefinitely. John stared at the orb, his heart pounding. A part of him wanted to walk away, to leave this moon, Soraya, and all the alien politics behind. But deep down, he knew there was no turning back. He reached out, hesitating just inches from the core. What if it explodes or something? He asked nervously. It won't, Soraya said with quiet confidence. You sound so sure. She nodded. Because if it were going to explode, it would have done so the moment you walked into this chamber. John swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and pressed his hand against the core. The moment his skin made contact, the hangar was flooded with light. The ship's walls shimmered, and symbols began appearing along the floor, glowing and shifting like they were alive. The core's golden hue intensified, spiraling out in thin threads of energy that danced along John's arm. He gritted his teeth, expecting pain, but there was none. Instead, he felt connected, as if the ship itself was recognizing him. Soraya watched in silent awe. It's working, she whispered. John glanced at her, his eyes wide. What's happening? The ship is bonding with you, Soraya explained. You're activating systems that have been dormant for centuries. The orb finally dimmed, returning to its calm glow. The symbols along the floor faded, and the hangar settled into silence once more. John let out a breath, pulling his hand back. Well, that was intense. Soraya approached, offering a rare smile. You did well. Now the ship is fully operational. John couldn't help but grin slightly. I guess I really am the key to everything, huh? Her smile faded just a little. Yes, but that also means the hunters will stop at nothing to find you now. John's grin disappeared. Right, can't have nice things for too long. Soraya stepped toward the control panel, activating the engines. Come. We need to leave this moon before they realize what we've done. As the ship hummed to life beneath their feet, John followed her to the cockpit. He couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The final deal. The starship's engines roared to life, shaking the ground beneath the ancient hangar. Blue light cascaded over the rocky interior as the massive vessel lifted slowly into the air. John sat stiffly in the co-pilot's seat, eyes fixed on the swirling displays that flickered in front of him. Even with all the lights and fancy alien tech, he couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. You sure they won't track us? John asked, gripping the armrest as the ship ascended through the mist. Soraya's fingers danced across the console, adjusting their course. The cloaking system is active. We'll be invisible to their sensors. John exhaled through his nose, but the anxiety didn't leave. He cast a glance at the rear display. The warship that had been hunting them was still hovering near the moon's atmosphere. How long before they realize we're gone? Soraya's silver eyes narrowed slightly. Not long. John shifted uncomfortably. Great. The ship broke through the upper atmosphere, and the fog below was replaced by the endless stretch of space. For a moment, John allowed himself to relax, sinking into the seat. The stars outside were breathtaking, far brighter than anything he'd ever seen from Earth. This is kind of beautiful, he admitted quietly. Soraya didn't respond immediately. When John glanced at her, he caught a faint, distant expression on her face. She wasn't admiring the stars. Her gaze was cold, calculating, like she was already planning the next move. Soraya, John said cautiously, what aren't you telling me? Her grip tightened subtly on the controls. John sat forward. Come on, I just activated some ancient alien tech with my DNA. I feel like I deserve some straight answers by now. Soraya sighed softly, leaning back in her chair. The artifact, the Celestar core you unlocked. It's not just a power source, it's also a beacon. John froze. A beacon? For what? Soraya met his gaze, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of something that almost resembled guilt. For the High Council. John blinked. I thought we were trying to avoid attention. Now you're telling me you lit up a galactic flare for the people chasing us. They're not the ones I'm calling, Soraya corrected. The High Council governs the Empire. Even the hunters fear them. If they know you exist, if they see what you can do, they may offer you protection. John frowned. May. That's not exactly comforting. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. The Council operates by their own rules. If they see value in you, they will safeguard you. But there will be a price. John leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. And what's that price? Soraya's voice dropped to a whisper. You will no longer belong to Earth. The words hung heavily in the air. John stared at her. What do you mean by that? If the Council claims you, John, they will take you, away from your planet, away from your old life. Her gaze softened, but there was no hiding the truth. You would be bound to them, a tool they could use as they see fit. John's mouth went dry. The weight of the decision began to settle over him. He shook his head. So either I risk getting hunted down by assassins or sign away my freedom to some galactic government I've never met. Yes. John let out a hollow laugh, leaning his head back against the seat. I really walked into this, didn't I? Soraya glanced at him, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for this to happen, John. But now that it has, I will make sure they see your value. John looked at her, reading between the lines. And yours. Soraya didn't deny it. Before John could respond, the ship's sensors chimed sharply. A holographic projection flickered to life above the dashboard, displaying a sleek black cruiser emerging from hyperspace directly ahead. It was smaller than the warship but carried the same predatory design. John tensed. Let me guess. Hunters. Soraya's eyes darkened. No. Worse. The cruiser hailed them, and Soraya hesitated for a moment before accepting the transmission. A pale, elongated face appeared on the screen, a regal-looking alien with piercing violet eyes and golden markings running down his temple. Lady Soraya, the alien said in a smooth, cool tone. You've been busy. Soraya straightened in her seat. Counselor Dren, I wasn't expecting you to respond so quickly. The counselor's gaze drifted to John. His expression remained impassive, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. So this is the human, Dren mused. Interesting. John shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, hi. I'm John. Thanks for dropping by unannounced. Dren ignored him, focusing on Soraya. You know the rules, Soraya. Bringing a human off-world without prior approval is a direct violation of interstellar law. I had no choice, Soraya replied calmly. The hunters forced my hand. Dren arched an eyebrow. Convenient. John leaned toward Soraya, whispering out of the side of his mouth. Is he going to help us, or? Soraya held his gaze, speaking aloud for Dren to hear. We are invoking the ancient right of sanctuary. The human activated the core. That makes him valuable to the Empire. Dren was silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. Very well. You may proceed to the capital. But understand this, Soraya. If the Council deems him a threat, there will be no mercy. The transmission cut out, and the cruiser slowly drifted to the side, allowing them passage. John exhaled slowly. Well, that wasn't ominous or anything. Soraya guided the ship forward, her expression unreadable. John watched her carefully. What happens when we reach the capital? She finally looked at him, her eyes soft but serious. Then, you decide your fate.